afternoon, everybody. Glad to see you here. This is in a collaboration with the City of Placerville and the Heritage Association, kind of celebrating the National Preservation Month of May. We're very pleased to receive a proclamation from the city proclaiming the Heritage Association and our work. And so, without any further ado, I will ask Mr. Morrison to stand up and say a few words.
Good evening, everyone. I was sitting down there when Charlene asked me to come and welcome you all here and speak just for a second, and then I'm going to turn it over to the real person that knows what she's talking about. But as I was sitting there, I think maybe the first thing I better say when I get up here is I'm not going to talk about redevelopment or a roundabout. So you can relax and we can forget about those issues for tonight. Okay, this is a good thing tonight. Hopefully everybody thinks this is a good thing. I do. I had a chance to meet our speaker tonight this afternoon, and I'm excited for the topic and to see what we can do here in Placerville. I think that since I've been here, hard to believe it's going on almost 6 months now. It's going fast, but I think we've had a good relationship with the Heritage Association and got some things accomplished and some more things we want to work on to preserve our historic assets that we have here in Placerville. So thank you for coming. I wish we had a few more people out there, and maybe there's some more that will come in. We do have several of you here, and we appreciate you coming and looking forward to the presentation and seeing what we can do to do a better job here in Placerville with the historic preservation. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn it back to Charlene. Okay.
Good evening. I'm Charlene McCaslin. I'm with the Heritage Association, and I'm going to read Jennifer's bio because I can't remember all the accomplishments she's done. She's the Field Service Director with California Preservation Foundation, and that's in partnership with the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Previously, she served as Associate Planner with the City of San Clemente in the Advanced Planning Division, focusing on historic preservation program and other long-range city planning projects. While at the city, Ms. Gates was responsible for processing and monitoring the Mills Act program. Her background includes design, planning, and preservation through experience with many public sector programs, including the Oklahoma Main Street Center and the National Historic Landmarks Program at the National Park Service Northeast Regional Office in Philadelphia. Ms. Gates has a dual master's in city planning and historic preservation from the University of Pennsylvania and is a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. I'd like to welcome Jennifer. We're glad to have her here tonight.
Well, thank you, and thank you all for coming tonight and having me give this presentation on the economic benefits of historic preservation. I think sometimes we forget what great assets our historic buildings are in our communities. And working with the Main Street Center, I really learned a lot more about downtowns in rural communities, suburban communities, and what a valuable asset they are to our economics. So tonight I'm going to just start off briefly and just talk about California Preservation Foundation. We are the only statewide nonprofit membership-based organization in California, and our goal is to educate and advocate on historic preservation and to protect our diverse heritage here in California. The Field Services Program is a new program, and I'm the director of it for the past year and a half. It is a grant-funded program in partnership with the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So it's a 50% grant-funded, and the rest 50% comes from donors and members and others, and as well as grants. So the goal of that program is to provide on-site technical assistance, such as education like I'm doing tonight, as well as helping with local governments, organizations, private property owners with their different preservation initiatives and projects in their own communities. So I work in a variety of different communities with a lot of diverse heritage throughout the state of California, and I get to travel a lot, which is great. I've only lived here for 5 years now, and so I'm really getting to explore a lot more of California, and only a year and a half up here in Northern California. So tonight we're going to talk about a little bit about, just to start with, what is historic preservation and what it's not. Also talking about preservation as an economic generator, and more specifically focusing on heritage tourism. And then also we're going to go through some economic incentives and tools that are good for local governments as well as private property owners, so different things that the property owners or the local governments can take advantage of. And some also are grants that nonprofits can apply for. In the back of the room there were a couple of handouts. I will reference a couple of them tonight. But one of them is a list, it's 4 pages, of links to different funding sources that are throughout the nation and the state. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers. So why do we do historic preservation? I was looking at the National Historic Preservation Act recently, and I was looking at the very beginning and of why they even wrote the act in the first place. And so I'm going to say a couple of their preambles. So the preservation of this irreplaceable heritage is in the public interest, so that its vital legacy of cultural, educational, aesthetic, inspirational, economic, and energy benefits will be maintained and enriched for future generations of Americans. Another one that I really like is the increased knowledge of our historic resources, the establishment of better means of identifying and administering them, and the encouragement of their preservation will improve the planning and execution of the federal and federally assisted projects and will assist economic growth and development. I think this is a good beginning to what we're talking about today in economic benefits of preservation. The nation has recognized, our federal government has recognized the importance of our historic resources for our economies. So historic preservation is not just about the past. It's also about the continuity of our buildings that have come before us and that will continue on after we're gone. It's also about community. A lot of historic districts and historic neighborhoods, they have a sense of community pride that you don't really find in other newer neighborhoods. It's a lot more character as well. It's a patina, I like to say, of developing over time this patina of community character. And also, as we touched on, it's about the future. It's for our future generations, our children today, and what they can learn about our history, and that'll be maintained in the future. Historic preservation is not about stopping change and new development. It's not bad for business. It's definitely not only for the rich. It's not always more expensive than new construction. Sometimes it is, but there's things that get weighed into that discussion. And then it's not a violation of property rights. That's already been decided by the Supreme Court. So we know that that's not a violation. So preservation as an economic generator. So these are some facts that have been found during different studies that have been performed. So as an example, so preservation creates jobs, specifically it's local jobs, because the majority of the work that goes into historic preservation is labor, and that's where a lot of the costs come in. That's why it's considered sometimes more expensive. But that labor is typically done by your local labor force because it's a lot more detailed labor. And then that also is labor that lives locally, and they also spend locally. So that money is getting reinvested again and again in the community. Sometimes with large projects, that money then leaves the community and goes to another city. So in California, 5 more local jobs are created by restoring a historic building than a new construction. Also, $1 million spent on rehabilitation compared to new construction provides $107,000 more in community income and $34,000 more in retail sales. Something to think about. And that's not California-based, though. That's in the nation. That was a national study. And also what I talked about earlier is with that reciprocal effect. Rehabilitation creates more rehabilitation as well. It's like your neighbor, when they improve their property, sometimes that influences other neighbors to improve their properties, cut their lawn, paint their home. So it's that reciprocal effect. And also, it generates a lot more rehabilitation in your historic districts. And community pride, that's a big part of our economic welfare. When people have this sense of community pride, a lot of more people will actually spend locally, stay local, vacation locally. So here's a couple of myths. Donovan Ripkema has 2 books on the economics of historic preservation. That's printed by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. I highly recommend, if you're really interested in the economic benefits, to look at his books. So one of those is the myths of rehabilitation versus new construction. The cost of rehabilitation in the end is nearly always more than new construction. Not always true. It takes longer to rehabilitate an existing structure than starting from scratch. This also is not always true. Sometimes it may take longer because of the amount of actual hand detailing that sometimes goes into work. So taking down a window, readjusting the strings, milling it, all these different aspects may take a little bit longer, but sometimes if what you're doing is painting and things like that, not necessarily. Rent obtained from quality rehabilitated spaces are much less than new buildings. That's also not true. Some historic buildings are at a premium. Certain companies prefer to be in historic buildings than new buildings. It just is attracting the right businesses for your historic buildings. The remaining economic life of a rehabilitated building is shorter than a new building. If you think about it, a rehabilitated building typically is a building that's already been around for at least 50 years. New construction materials and new building practices, I was an architecture student, I remember hearing this going, are you kidding me? Is only 30 years. That is the life expectancy of new construction, and that's what they build to. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. One of the biggest preservation as an economic generator is heritage tourism. This is huge, and this is huge for this community as well. So traveling to experience the places and activities that authentically, that's a key word there, authentically represent the stories and people of the past and present. It includes historic, cultural, and your natural resources. And this area is rich in all that. I've had fun today driving around, trying to find different places, and I got to see a lot. Obviously, I found the Goldbug Mine, drove up, been going all around, finding different places. Cultural heritage travelers stay longer and they spend more. This is very important to keep in mind. In 2009, there was a research study done on U.S. cultural and heritage travelers. 78% of all of the U.S. leisure travelers participate in cultural and/or heritage activities, translating to 118.3 million adults each year. Cultural and heritage visitors spend on average $994 per trip, compared to about $611 for all U.S. travelers. I think the biggest benefit for heritage tourism is looking at the diversification of your local economies, and this is talking about you're having lots of different resources, not just your visitors, but you're also your local businesses. They are catering to your tourists as well as your residents. So you're diversifying your economy. Heritage tourism, I don't know if have you guys all gone to your local museum? I went today. There had been 4 people from Australia today. And there was also, when I was in there, 2 people that actually live here that had never been here inside the museum, and they wanted to learn more about the downtown. And I saw them for like 2 hours walking up and down Main Street here, which I think is great. There's also this website I found on Gold Country Visitors Association. They are promoting Gold Country throughout this entire area. You can see on the map the entire length of Gold Country. And here's a picture of your own community for El Dorado County. And they also promote events and attractions. So I would look and continue to promote your own events and your attractions here in Placerville through this site and other sites. So one other tool, which currently there's not a single one here in California, unfortunately, but we're working on that, is national heritage areas. This is a national designation by Congress, and it identifies a natural, cultural, historic, recreational resources in a region. And that region then collaborates through the local governments, public sector, private sector, nonprofits, and they all collaborate to promote their area. So kind of what the Gold Visitors Association is dealing with is what the heritage area does as well. But it also allows them to apply for funds to help them with their promotional materials. So in a 2005 survey, it estimated that 68.3 million visitors visited all entire 27 national heritage areas in the same year. That's a lot. Majority of the national heritage areas are located closer to the East Coast. In fact, the entire state of Tennessee is a national heritage area. And that connects all of their Civil War battlefields. That's their focus of their national heritage area. Another economic generator is Main Street program. And some downtown business associations look at the Main Street program. It's a national program that was created by the National Trust for Historic Preservation as kind of that framework for how to promote and educate on downtown. So it's a 4-point approach. It's about an organization, so you set up that organizational framework, your board and committees. And also you look at promotion, so how to promote all the businesses in your downtown. Also economic restructuring. That 4-point approach is focused on how to do business retention and educate on good business practices. So those that may have more experience and be a store owner for a longer time can help those newer businesses that come in to your community. Maybe it's even helping them learn about different software like QuickBooks or things like that. Also about design. It's educating about design. Some storefronts, helping certain business owners with their storefronts. Design was one of the main things I focused on because I was an architecture student when I worked for the Main Street program. And I would help different property owners throughout the state of Oklahoma understand what their building could actually look like if they put on a different coat of paint, if they changed their sign, if they took down the metal siding that went up in the 60s. What would their building actually look like today? So these are the different types of projects that they would work on. And typically maybe a local architect would then help with that design aspect. And then there's also the 8 principles that are pretty self-explanatory. Another economic generator is the Preserve America program. This is also another national program. It's a designation by the federal government. And in California, there are 35 Preserve America communities. There's 800 communities, or more than 800 communities now, in the United States. And what the goal of Preserve America program is specifically towards economic development, using your heritage and historic resources to promote economic development in your communities. So the grants that they offer are only for Preserve America communities, and they could be for other ways of promoting your community. That's what they're used for. So an example, when I worked for San Clemente, we did a Preserve America grant. We had just been designated Preserve America community and decided to automatically go for the grant that year. And we did wayfinding signage with it. So that's how we did. We did a whole wayfinding signage plan using the funds, and it's a 60-40 match for those grants. So I'm going to talk about some different economic tools and incentives. So there are a lot of financing tools out there. However, it takes lots of different tools and resources together to fund a project. And there is no such thing as free money. As much as I wish there was, it's just not out there. Money could grow on trees, like we all say all the time. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of time and a lot of community and personal resources to actually apply for these grants and put more time and effort into sometimes some of these tax credits and things like that. So one grant that is available from the federal government currently, hopefully it stays that way in the budget, is the Save America's Treasures grants. These are, there are a lot of really great examples of these projects on the National Park Service website. The grant award, the average award is about $223,000, and this award, this grant is actually more specifically towards bricks and mortar. It's one of the few that are actually out there. The catch is that your property has to be nationally significant. Now I'm going to explain something real quick. Just because a property is on the National Register of Historic Places does not mean that it's nationally significant. So when a property gets listed on the National Register, it's actually listed at either the local level, the state level, or at the national level. Typically, a building that is considered a National Historic Landmark is a nationally significant property. There's a lot of questions about that I've had recently. A lot of people are trying to go after the Save America's Treasures grants recently. But it's a dollar for dollar, non-federal match required, so 50-50. As I talked about a little bit, the Preserve America grants, it's $250,000 max. The only place that I've seen that received the $250,000 was the city of Los Angeles. They have 3 Preserve America neighborhoods. So a neighborhood can also be designated as a Preserve America community. And that's for, I'm gonna probably get this wrong, but Little Tokyo, Japantown, their Filipino district, and their Chinatown. So they're all part of the Preserve America, and that money also went towards actually developing marketing and to train volunteers. So that's what their funding went towards. Another is certified local government. This is also connected to the federal government, but it's something that you apply for through the state. So this State Historic Preservation Office here in California actually administers these grants, and you would apply annually after you became a certified local government. And actually there's not that many in California, surprisingly. So we're constantly promoting people to take advantage of this opportunity to become a certified local government. There is requirements to be a CLG. You do have to have a historic preservation ordinance, and also a resource list. And you need to have a commission or some type of advisory board that actually would listen and hear items in regards to their historic buildings. So these grants, this past year, 9 communities received grants totaling about $208,000. It's a 60-40 matching grant, and typically they're used to do survey work or general plan amendments for historic preservation elements. Also, National Register nominations, they can be used for that as well. Another tool, which doesn't necessarily associate itself a lot of the time with historic preservation, are community development block grants. This is actually a really good tool to use because a lot of our historic areas sometimes consist majority of low-income, moderately income communities. The projects are supposed to benefit low and moderate income persons or prevent or eliminate blight. So CDBG funds are interesting in ways that you can actually use them to create grants. And examples of this, you can see some communities will create a specific grant, maybe it's towards facade rehabilitation in the downtown or targeted neighborhood areas. People that would apply would meet the threshold for a low-income person, and then they could apply for this grant, and the funds could be used to actually improve their property. So this is a good tool for historic preservation as well. Also, the National Trust for Historic Preservation has grants available, and these are typically $500 to $5,000, and they're for planning efforts for the most part, or also, when I say planning, I also mean doing historic structure reports. So looking at the history of specific buildings or areas. Also doing work towards how to reuse these buildings. You usually start with a historic structures report, and you see what's your limitations on the structure itself, and then also looking at your market. Is it going to be a mixed-use property with housing or commercial? These are the types of studies that this funds can be used for. Also, the California Arts Council has some grants. Like I said, there is a sheet back there that has a lot of different grants that are available to museums, nonprofits, local governments. So they can be used in a variety of ways. There are specific grant programs that I've heard about, such as the Artists in Schools or Poetry Out Loud. Some historic sites, historic houses, use the Poetry Out Loud grant to get people to hold events in their historic sites to get people to come and visit. So it's another way to use your historic museums or sites in a different way that you probably didn't think about. And there's a lot of great programs as well that involve youth using these funds. And again, it's how to engage your community in your historic resources to then encourage the community pride in the historic resources. A lot of people have family that come and visit them. What do you do when you're actually here? Do you spend time in the community, go to your local resources, see your historic sites? Again, it's instilling that sense of community pride. Then the California Cultural and Historical Endowment was established in 2003. And it's a very competitive grant, very, very, very competitive. And it's for government entities and nonprofits and Indian tribes. And these grants also can be used for bricks and mortar work, the acquisition of properties, restoration. Just recently, a community I was working in received a small grant, and that's just for stabilization of their Bingkong building. Which is a Chinese cultural house. And the building is, looks like it's gonna fall over, so that's what it's for, the stabilization, just to keep it still for right now, until they can raise enough money to actually restore the property. It doesn't even have a facade on it, it's completely plywood on the front. So here's some other resources that are out there. Again, I put a lot of those on the sheet. So the National Park Service, of course, has some grants. I put the National Trust, National Endowment of the Arts. A lot of these have a lot of more links and resources that are out there, searchable databases. You put in, whether you're a nonprofit or a local government, and you can find these. Unfortunately, there's not a lot out there for private property owners. So that's where we get to these. These are tax credits. So the first one is the Federal Rehabilitation Tax Credit, which is a 20% tax credit. And it's only for qualified rehabilitation expenses. And it's only those that are incurred rehabilitating a certified structure for commercial or rental residential purposes, so not a single family home. This would be mostly used in downtowns or apartment buildings, hotels, those types of uses. And it's also only available to the owner and is claimed in the tax year the rehabilitated building is placed in service. It also there's been some creative financing along with those. Nonprofits can sell their tax credits, or they usually form partnerships with other developers that will then use those tax credits, because nonprofits will not need that. There's also a 10% tax credit that's available. Again, it's only for commercial, and the building must be built prior to 1936. This date is where we get our 50-year rule that some people have been reused over and over and over again. So in 1986, when the act was, National Historic Preservation Act was amended, this date flew in there. And so ever since then, we've been going off a 50-year rule. But the tax credit still only applies to 1936 or prior. It has not adjusted. And these are also buildings that don't have to be listed. So again, the only qualification pretty much for this building is that it has to be built prior to 1936, and it can't be used for residential purposes. For both of these tax credits, you will need to go and hire an architect that is more familiar with the tax credits, because there is a process through the State Historic Preservation Office that you would go through. I don't know if some of you were able to attend the presentation last month that somebody from the Office of Historic Preservation presented on, but their office, specifically that person that was here, actually reviews these projects on a daily basis throughout the state. So they review the drawings, make sure things are done according to the Secretary of Interior standards for historic preservation. So if it's a rehabilitation, they'll follow the rehabilitation standards, and that's typically the type of project that they do. There's some other tax credits out there. So there's a new markets tax credit, where an investor receives a 39% tax credit for making an investment. And these are sometimes a little bit more interesting. You really need a good accountant to work through these. Low income housing tax credit as well. These are applied a lot of the time for affordable housing projects. A lot of good examples are some of our historic schoolhouses that are quite large. Sometimes they don't really have another use that's ready to go into them. So what happens in a lot of communities is that these areas can be turned into what's considered low income or medium income housing, and a lot of the times it's for seniors. And so these schoolhouses are then using this housing tax credit as well as the federal rehabilitation tax credits, and potentially maybe even the new market tax credits. These tax credits can all be used together to fund a project, as well as grants. The Mills Act. This is really the main incentive for private property owners that is out there in the state of California. This is it. So it is basically a contract between the city or the county, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, that you would enter in as a private property owner, saying that you will maintain and preserve your home, and typically you have to be already on a historic list to be qualified for this contract, and that you will do what they ask of you. So in some communities, they ask for you to restore your home over a 10-year period, because that's the main life of these contracts is 10 years. That's actually renewed annually. So after the first year, it's another 10 years, and the next year is another 10 years. So it's in perpetuity on the property itself. It's not with the property, it's continually with the property owner, a new owner as the property sells. It doesn't move along with you. So this is a big incentive. It's actually on your property taxes. And some people will see up to 70% savings on their property taxes, depending on the value of their home when they purchased the home. So each jurisdiction designs their own program. That's the beauty of this act that was created in 1976 by Senator Mills. He actually created the act to preserve Hotel Del Coronado. That was the reason why it was falling into major disrepair. And so he created this act to give an incentive to the hotel owner. And that was the first property to actually use it. So, but not all local governments do participate in this program. It is something that they have to opt into participating and develop their own program, their own process, their own fees, everything with that contract. Another is conservation easements. Some properties, it's a voluntary legal agreement, and it holds true to the property itself. And basically what they're doing is selling their development rights. They're selling either the development of the property, or some communities have what's called a facade easement. So just the facade, so they wouldn't be changing or modifying the facade beyond its historic look. It's typically, transferred to a nonprofit, that easement on the property. California Preservation Foundation holds 5 property easements. Los Angeles Conservancy, I think, has 30 easements. So historic property owners sometimes put their homes into easements, and they sell that benefit. Another opportunity is tax increment financing. And I'm also on the next slide talking about business improvement districts, and these are mostly geared towards your downtown developments, your commercial districts. This is something also that property owners have an option to create, and basically they're taxing themselves. But the funds are intended to go towards improvements into the public right-of-way and such. So again, here's the business improvement district. As another example, where they basically are taxing or creating a fee in order to fund improvements within their district. And typically it's a 51% approval to get an actual business improvement district. So I just want to finish with an example of a project that's out there. And you can actually look up this building. It also received Save America's Treasures grant. It's a Far East building, and this is actually located in Los Angeles. It was built in 1890, and it was formerly 24 single-room occupancy units and 2 commercial spaces on the ground floor. So it sat vacant for 15 years, so I'm sure you know it was not probably looking very good. So the rehabilitation restored the existing fabric and reinforced the masonry building's integrity, so brought it up to code, also with the seismic retrofit. And they converted the 24 single-room occupancy to 14 studios and 2 one-bedroom units. And all the units are affordable housing. Just a summary of what the costs were, just a few costs there, totaling almost $4 million. And then you can see all the different financing that had to go into actually funding the project. It does take a lot of effort sometimes in creating all the different financing that's available to fund a project such as this. I recently, have you guys been to the Fox Theater? It's been recently restored in Oakland. That has 25 different funding sources to actually fund that project. So again, creative financing, looking at a lot of different opportunities, tax credits, grants, looking at housing authorities, depending on what your uses are that you're looking for, actually creates the different opportunities for financing for a project. Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for having me. And please make sure you signed in because I'm going to be sharing that list with the historical.